The Quiet Ranch. John Harris was a man who wanted nothing more than silence. He had fought many wars, traveled across worlds, and seen things most people would never believe. But after so many battles, after losing so many friends, he chose a quiet life. Now he lived alone on a wide ranch at the edge of the desert. The air was dry, the nights were cold, and the days passed slowly. But that was how John liked it. Every morning he rose with the sun. He brewed strong coffee, fed the horses, and walked the old fence line. Sometimes he fixed a broken post. Sometimes he simply stood still, listening to the wind across the sand. To him, the silence was better than any music. No commanders shouting, no guns firing, no alarms ringing, just peace. At night, John sat on the porch with his dog, a tired old hound named Scout. He smoked his pipe and watched the stars. He never forgot that once, long ago, he had seen those same stars up close. He remembered the ships, the battles, the black sky filled with fire, but he told himself those days were gone forever. Now the ranch was his world and the universe could carry on without him. For years, nothing disturbed him. The neighbors were far away, and strangers rarely passed by. John had almost convinced himself that the world had forgotten his name, and that was fine, because he wanted to be forgotten. He wanted to grow old with silence, with horses, and with the desert wind. But peace has a way of breaking when you least expect it. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in red and gold, John noticed something strange. At first he thought it was only a storm on the horizon, a trick of the light, but the glow was too sharp, too steady, like fire that refused to fade. He narrowed his eyes, leaning forward on the porch. Scout growled low in his throat, his ears flat against his head. The glow moved, shifting across the ski. HFY. It was not lightning, not a storm, not anything natural. John had seen that kind of glow before, far above in the war. It was the glow of ships moving in the night. His chest tightened, old memories rising like ghosts. He shook his head, telling himself he was wrong, but the feeling in his bones told him he was not. For 3 nights, the strange lights came again. They hung above the desert, far but not far enough. Sometimes they vanished in silence. Other times they darted quick like hunters searching the ground. John tried to ignore them, but he could not. Each night he sat longer on the porch, his pipe untouched, his eyes fixed on the dark sky. Scout refused to leave his side, tail stiff, eyes glowing with fear. A sound like thunder, but softer, deeper, coming from the earth itself. The ground beneath his boots trembled, the fence rattled, the horses in the barn kicked at their stalls. John grabbed the old rifle he kept by the door. He had not held it in years, but his hands still knew the weight. He stepped into the desert night, his breath cold, his eyes sharp. There in the distance he saw it, a shadow falling across the sand, growing larger with every heartbeat. Then came another, and another, until 11 shapes glowed faintly against the stars. They were not airplanes, not drones, not human machines. John's heart slowed, his mind cold and clear. He whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "They found me." The shapes did not pass. They circled, lowered, and then one by one they touched the desert floor. No dust rose, no engines roared, only silence, heavy as stone. 11 lights burned in the dark, steady and waiting. John stood alone at the edge of his porch, rifle in hand. He did not move, but every instinct told him this night would break his quiet life. He felt it as sure as he felt the desert wind on his face. Scout whined and pressed against his leg. The horses screamed in the barn. The ranch, which had been silent for so many years, was now alive with fear. And John Harris, the man who only wanted peace, knew deep inside that peace was gone. The war he had walked away from had found him again, and it had come to his ranch on 11 shadows, glowing like fire in the night, the unexpected visitors. The desert was quiet, but the quiet felt wrong. John Harris stood on his porch with his old rifle, watching the 11 glowing shapes. They had landed without sound, without dust, like shadows that carried their own light. He could not see them clearly yet, only the outlines against the starlight, but he felt the weight of their presence, heavy as a storm waiting to, break. For a long moment, nothing moved. Scout growled low. The horses kicked the barn doors, and John's heart beat slow but hard. Then, from the nearest shape, a door opened. A line of silver light cut across the sand, and from that light, a figure stepped out. It was tall, taller than any human woman. Her skin shimmered like dark stone under moonlight, her eyes burning with a strange blue glow. She carried no weapon in her hands, but John felt she was more dangerous than anyone he had met in war. Behind her, more figures followed, one after another. until all 11 stood on the desert floor. Each wore armor that looked broken, scarred, yet still strong. Each carried grief in their faces, the kind of grief soldiers wore when they had buried too many. They moved together, not fast, not slow, but with the grace of people who had fought battles side by side. And when they stopped, they all turned their eyes toward John. For the first time in years, John Harris felt like prey instead of predator. The leader, the first to step out, raised her hand, not in threat but in greeting. Her voice carried across the desert, soft but sharp. "We have come for you." John's rifle did not lower. He had heard many voices across many worlds, but never one like this. Her words were not broken, not strange, but perfect, as if she had spoken his language her whole life. He said nothing, only narrowed his eyes. The woman stepped closer, the blue fire in her eyes never leaving his. "You are the protector of lost stars," she said. "You are the one who showed mercy when others would not." John's chest tightened. That name, Protector of Lost Stars, was not one spoken on Earth. It was a name whispered long ago, during a war humans had almost lost. He had carried it once, but buried it deep when he left the battlefield. How did these strangers know it? How did they find him here? Scout barked, breaking the silence. The widows, the word came to John's mind unbidden, shifted their stance, their armor glinting under the stars. They did not draw weapons, but the air between them and John grew tense like a wire ready to snap. Finally John spoke, his voice rough from years of silence. "You should not be here." The leader tilted her head, her glowing eyes never blinking. "Neither should you, soldier," she replied, "yet here we are." She stepped closer until the porch light touched her face. Her skin bore marks like cracks, scars of battles fought in fire, but her gaze was unshaken, strong, full of sorrow, yet sharp with purpose. "We are widows," she said. "Our mates were taken in battle, their ships destroyed, their voices lost." Her words were calm, but every syllable carried the weight of pain. "Your kind fought that war. Your kind brought us grief, yet you were different." John's grip on his rifle tightened. He remembered that battle years ago, on the edge of an alien colony. The order had been clear: destroy everything, leave no survivors. But John had chosen another path. He had spared the helpless, shielded the broken, and for that, he had been given a name he never asked for: Protector of Lost Stars. Now those survivors stood before him, 11 widows bound together by loss. But why here? Why now? John scanned the desert, half expecting an ambush. The widows seemed strong, but their armor was cracked, their eyes heavy. Were they here for safety, or were they here to drag him back into a war he had walked away from? The leader's voice cut through his thoughts. "We are hunted," she said. "The ones who took our mates now hunt us. They will come here. They will come soon." John's stomach sank. His quiet ranch, his silent life was about to become a battleground. He wanted to tell them to leave, to take their war somewhere else, but deep inside, he knew the desert would never let them go. The hunters would follow, and the storm would break on his land, whether he wished it or not. The widows stepped closer, their circle tightening around him, not threatening, but pleading. The leader lowered her head slightly, almost like a bow. "You once showed mercy, Protector. We ask you to show it again." The night grew colder, the stars sharper, the silence heavier. John Harris, who only wanted peace, now stood face to face with 11 alien widows, and he understood the truth. His quiet life was over. The desert had called back the soldier, and there was no turning away. Secrets of the widows. The night burned with silence. John Harris stood with his rifle, 11 alien widows before him, their blue eyes glowing under the desert stars. They had spoken his war name, the one he had buried deep, and every bone in his body told him this was no dream. They had come for him, and they carried secrets like knives hidden behind sorrow. John led them into the barn, the only place wide enough for them all. The widows moved like shadows, their armor whispering as they walked. Scout followed close, tail stiff, his growl low but constant. The horses kicked and whined, unsettled by the strangers. John lit a lantern, its dim glow falling across scarred faces, cracked armor, and eyes that had seen too much death. They stood in silence until the leader finally spoke. Her voice was steady, but pain lived in every word. "We were wives, mothers, warriors," she said. "We belonged to men who fought the war against your kind." Her eyes burned into John's. "You were the enemy, yet you were not." John said nothing. He had no words for ghosts. The woman's hand tightened into a fist as if holding back anger. Our mates are gone, lost in battles that left our worlds in ashes, she continued. But not all battles were the same. Not all soldiers were the same. She stepped closer, her shadow stretching across the dirt floor. You, protector, chose mercy when others chose fire. John felt the weight of old memories return. He remembered the colony world, the screams, the command to burn everything. And he remembered disobeying, lowering his weapon and shielding the helpless. He remembered the women, the children, the cries of the widowed left behind. He had thought the galaxy would forget, but these 11 had not. One of the widows, smaller than the rest, removed her helmet. Her skin was pale, marked with thin lines that glowed faintly like veins of silver. She looked young, far too young for the grief in her eyes. My husband died in the Black Rift, she said softly. But his last words were your name. She lifted her head, tears shining in her strange eyes. He said, if ever we were lost, find the protector of lost stars. John's chest tightened. He wanted to deny it, to walk away, to send them back into the desert night, but the words chained him, pulled him back into a war he never wanted to see again. The leader raised her hand, and the younger widow stepped back. Do you see, soldier, she said, we are bound by grief, but we are also bound by your mercy. Her voice dropped lower, like a knife pressed against the dark. And now we are hunted. The word hung heavy in the barn. Hunted. The lantern light flickered as if it feared the truth itself. John's eyes narrowed. By who? He asked. The widows looked at one another, silent, their faces carved in shadow. Finally, the leader spoke. They call themselves the Harrow. The name slid through John like ice. He had heard it once, whispered in old war rooms, a name cursed even among killers. The Harrow were not soldiers, they were hunters. They did not fight for nations or fleets. They fought for pleasure, for trophies, for blood. And if the Harrow had marked the widows, then John's ranch was no longer safe. Not tonight, not ever. The widows shifted uneasily, their armor rattling faint. They will come, the leader said, her voice hard as steel. They have followed us across systems, across dead worlds, across voids where no life should exist, and now they will follow us here. She stepped closer, so close John could see the lines of old scars across her neck. You have two choices, protector. Turn us away, and they will kill us, or stand with us, and they will come for you too. John said nothing. But inside, war was rising. He had buried his weapons, his training, his hunger for battle. But the truth pressed against his chest like fire in his blood. The universe had not forgotten him. The war had found him again. Scout barked, sharp and sudden, and the widows turned their heads as one. Outside, the desert wind carried a new sound, faint but growing, a hum like wings cutting the air. The lantern shook, the horses screamed, and John knew the Harrow were not far. The hunters had already found his land. The widows drew close, forming a circle around him. Their blue eyes glowed brighter, their grief turning into something fierce and sharp. The leader lowered her voice, each word heavy with promise. They think we are broken. They think we are prey. Her eyes burned as she met John's. But they forget what grief can make of us, and they do not know what you are capable of. John's rifle hung heavy in his hands. The man who wanted only silence stood surrounded by warriors who carried the weight of galaxies in their grief. The Harrow were coming. The widows carried secrets, and John Harris understood that the quiet ranch he had built would soon become a place of fire and blood. The night outside trembled with unseen wings. The stars above seemed sharper, watching, waiting, and deep inside John felt the soldier rise again, not by choice, not by desire, but by fate. The war he left behind had arrived at his door, and this time there would be no why-yo. Walking away. Shadows in the desert. The night was heavy with silence. John Harris stood in the barn surrounded by 11 alien widows, their armor cracked, their eyes glowing like blue fire. They had told him of the Harrow, hunters that stalked them across the stars. And now, outside in the desert, John could feel it too. Something unseen was moving through the darkness. Scout barked again, sharp and frantic. The horses screamed in their stalls, stamping at the floorboards. The lantern shook, its light flickering, as if the air itself trembled. John stepped to the door of the barn, rifle in hand, and peered into the endless desert night. At first he saw only stars, only dunes, only the wind dancing across the sand. But then he saw it. Movement. Too smooth. Too steady to be natural. Shadows. 3 shapes drifted across the sand like smoke. Silent. Slow. Patient. They were not human. Not animal. Not like anything John had ever seen. Their bodies were long, their outlines shifting like liquid darkness, and their eyes, dozens of red points glowing like embers, watched the ranch from every angle. The widows moved closer behind him. "They are scouts," the leader whispered, her voice low with dread. "They watch before they strike." Her words cut into John's chest like cold steel. The Harrow were already here, testing, circling, waiting for the kill. One of the widows stepped forward, pulling a broken blade from her back. Her armor was cracked, her arm still bleeding from old wounds, but her stance was ready. John raised his hand, stopping her. "No," he said, his voice rough. "You fight them out there, you die out there, and so does everyone inside." His eyes narrowed, his soldier's instincts waking from long sleep. "They're not attacking yet, they're hunting. They want fear first." The widows exchanged looks, their grief sharpening into anger. The leader spoke again. "You know their ways." John's jaw tightened. "I know predators," he said, "and these aren't here for the land, they're here for blood." The shadows crept closer, their glowing eyes flickering like fireflies in the dark. Then suddenly one of them shifted, splitting into 2 shapes, then 3, then many. John's breath slowed. Not shadows, drones. The air buzzed faintly now, a vibration so deep it crawled into his bones. The drones glided low across the desert floor, circling the ranch, their red eyes flashing, scanning, marking. Every instinct in John screamed to shoot, to fight, to break them before they swarmed. But he knew better. A shot now would be wasted, and the Harrow were waiting for it. Behind him the widows stirred, armor rattling, breath sharp. They wanted to fight. Their grief demanded it. But John raised his rifle and kept it pointed low. "Hold," he whispered. The word was sharp, a command born from battlefields long past, and to his surprise they obeyed. For long minutes the ranch stood still. The drones circled, their hum rising and falling like a swarm of insects. Then, one by one, they drifted back into the desert, their red eyes fading until only stars remained. Silence returned, but it was not peace. It was the silence of hunters retreating, waiting, planning. The widows let out slow breaths, but no relief showed on their faces. "They know we are weak," one of them muttered, voice bitter with anger. "They will come when the sun is gone again." The leader turned to John, her eyes steady. "This place is no longer safe, Protector. The Harrow will burn it, and you with it." John lowered his rifle and stared across the desert. His quiet ranch, the land he had built to forget the war, now carried the mark of predators. He thought of leaving, of running, of abandoning it all. But then his gaze fell on the widows, standing together in their broken armor, carrying the weight of dead husbands. They had no home, no safe place to run, and now they had chosen his. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with something heavier. He stepped forward, voice cold and steady. "If they're coming, then we fight." The widows raised their heads, eyes burning brighter. John's voice grew harder. "But you fight smart, not wild. The Harrow want chaos. You give them order. They want fear. You give them fury." The leader studied him for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod. For the first time since they had landed, John saw something in her eyes that was not sorrow. It was respect. The desert was silent again, but the silence now carried promise. Promise of blood, of battle, of the return of a man who had sworn he was done with war. John Harris, the retired soldier, the farmer of quiet land, felt the weight of his rifle, and he knew the shadows in the desert were only the beginning. The Harrow had found him. The hunt had begun. And before the next sun rose, his ranch would be drenched in fire. The reluctant protector. The night was deep, and the desert carried a silence that was not natural. John Harris stood at the edge of his porch, rifle heavy in his hands, 11 alien widows behind him, their armor cracked but their eyes glowing with blue fire. The Harrow scouts had vanished into the dark, but John knew predators never vanished for long. They circled, they tested, and when the prey grew tired, they struck. Inside the barn, the widows gathered weapons of their own, broken blades, battered rifles, tools that looked ancient but still deadly. They were not helpless, not by any measure, but John saw the truth. They were warriors without a leader. They had fire, but no shape, and fire without shape burned itself out. John tried to push away the soldier inside him. He told himself this was not his war, not his burden. He told himself he was just a farmer now, just a tired man who wanted silence, but silence was already gone. The desert had already chosen. Scout barked, sharp and furious, his fur beak-ears-tea. Whistling, the horses screamed again, kicking their stalls. The widows froze, heads turning to the sky, and then John heard it too. The hum, low and deep, like thunder hidden under the ground. It grew louder, closer, until the night itself seemed to vibrate. John raised his rifle, eyes narrowing. Over the ridge, shapes appeared, sliding across the sand like shadows born of fire. Harrow drones, dozens of them, red eyes glowing, wings humming. They descended on the ranch like a storm of steel insects. The widows tensed, ready to charge, but John barked a word he hadn't spoken in years. Hold! The word cracked through the barn like lightning, sharp and commanding. For a breath they froze, their eyes flicking toward him, and in that breath, John saw what he had feared. They needed someone to lead, and whether he wanted it or not, that someone was him. The first drones swooped low, their red beams cutting across the sand. John fired, one shot clean and perfect. The drone exploded in sparks, crashing into the dirt. The widows roared, their voices sharp and furious, and charged into the night. Blades slashed, rifles cracked, alien cries filled the air. The ranch exploded into chaos. Drones screamed overhead, firing red bolts into the barn, tearing wood and fire into the air. The widows fought with wild fury, moving as one, their broken armor flashing under the stars. John moved among them, calm, steady, his rifle speaking in sharp bursts, every shot finding its mark. He was not a farmer now, not a tired man, he was a soldier again. The leader of the widows fought near him, her blade glowing faintly, cutting drones from the sky with each swing. Her movements were sharp but desperate, her strength born of grief. You fight like them, she shouted over the chaos, but you are not one of them. John's voice was rough, steady. I fight to survive, he said, same as you. The battle raged, drones poured in from every side, the barn burning, the desert lit by fire. John ordered the widows into formation, shouting commands he thought he had forgotten. Circle tight, he barked. Cover the flanks, hit the wings, don't scatter. They obeyed, and slowly the chaos began to bend. Their fury became precision, their grief became a blade. But the Harrow were not finished. From the shadows beyond the dunes came larger shapes, towering hunters wrapped in black steel. Their steps shook the ground, their weapons glowing with red fire. The true killers had arrived. The widows faltered for a moment, fear flickering in their eyes. John stepped forward, rifle raised, voice sharp. Hold the line, he roared. The words were not gentle, not kind, but they were strong, and the widows held. The hunters advanced, red fire cutting across the sand. John fired again and again, his rifle burning hot. The widows leapt into the fray, their blades singing, their voices rising in a war cry that echoed across the desert. One widow fell, struck by a hunter's blast, but even as she fell, she drove her blade deep into its chest. Another widow dragged her away, refusing to leave her behind. The desert became fire and blood. The ranch he had built for peace burned around him, the barn collapsing, the fences shattered. But John Harris did not retreat. Every shot, every breath, every word reminded him of who he had been, the protector of lost stars. The battle ended as suddenly as it began. The surviving hunters retreated into the dunes, dragging their broken with them. The drones scattered, their red eyes fading into the night. Only silence remained, heavy and sharp. The widows stood around John, breathing hard, armor scorched, weapons bloody. They had fought with him. They had bled with him, and now they looked at him not as prey, not as stranger, but as leader. The leader of the widows stepped closer, her eyes meeting his. You cannot deny it now, she said softly. You are one of us. John looked at the burning barn, the shattered ranch, the desert scarred with fire. The life he had built was gone, the silence broken forever, and though every part of him wanted to resist, he knew the truth. He was no longer just a farmer. He was once again a protector, and the war was only beginning, the last stand. The ranch burned through the night. Smoke curled into the desert sky, glowing red under the stars. John Harris stood among the widows, his rifle hot in his hands, his body aching with the weight of old battles. The drones were destroyed, the hunters pushed back, but he knew this was not victory. This was only the beginning. The widows gathered in a circle, their armor scorched, their blades cracked, yet their eyes burned brighter than before. They looked to John, waiting, not as strangers but as soldiers look to a commander. John felt their gaze heavy on him. He had wanted silence. He had wanted peace, but fate had stripped that from him. Now the desert called for war. He walked the ruined barn, kicking aside broken wood and shattered drone parts. His boots left prints in the ash, his mind racing with old instincts. Every fence post, every wagon wheel, every barrel became more than wood and steel. It became defense. It became a fortress. The ranch would not be abandoned. It would stand or it would burn with them. Barricade the north side, he barked, his voice sharp. Dig lines here, here, and here. Use the sand to choke their machines. Put fire at the weak points. We force them where we want them. The widows moved without question, obeying, their grief sharpening into discipline. They carried heavy beams, dug trenches with bare hands, poured oil into the sand. The ranch, once a place of silence, now echoed with the rhythm of war. The leader of the widows walked beside John, her eyes steady. "You fought like this before," she said, almost like an accusation. John's jaw tightened. "I've seen what happens when you wait for the enemy to strike first," he replied. Her gaze softened, but only slightly. "And what happens?" she asked. "They bury you," John answered. The night stretched long, every sound in the desert sharp as a blade. The wind carried whispers, the kind of whispers that only hunters made. Then, just before dawn, the ground trembled. A deep vibration rolled across the sand, shaking the broken barn walls. The Harrow had come. From the dunes, shapes emerged, larger and darker than before. Dozens of hunters in black steel, weapons glowing like molten fire. Behind them rolled war machines, crawling on metal legs, their cannons burning with red light. Above, the sky filled with drones, a swarm thick as locusts, their hum shaking the very air. The widows formed ranks at the barricades, blades ready, rifles aimed. John stood in the center, his rifle steady, his breath calm. Scout growled low, his fur bristling. The ranch had become a fortress, but it would soon be a battlefield. The Harrow paused at the edge of the dunes, watching, waiting. John felt their gaze, cold, cruel, patient. Then the first blast came. A cannon roared, fire tore across the sand. The barricade shook but held. The widows answered with gunfire, sharp and furious. The battle began. The drones swarmed first, rushing low, their red beams slicing through the smoke. The widows fought with precision, slashing them from the sky, shooting them from the air. John fired calmly, every shot a kill, his mind a machine of war. Still the swarm pressed, endless, hungry. Then the hunters charged, their black armor glinting, their weapons cutting through barricades. The widows screamed their war cry and met them head-on, blades clawing, ashing, sparks flying. The ground shook with every strike, blood and fire spilling across the ranch. John fought among them, his rifle a constant roar, his voice shouting commands. "Flank left, hold the center, push the right." The widows obeyed, their fury turning into a wall of steel. But the Harrow were too many. For every hunter that fell, 2 more stepped from the dunes. For every drone destroyed, another filled the sky. The ranch was breaking, splinter by splinter, beam by beam. The leader of the widows fought beside John, her blade cutting bright arcs. "We cannot hold," she shouted over the clash. John's eyes burned. "We hold," he growled, his voice sharp as steel. "We hold or we die, there's nothing else." A hunter broke through, its blade raised high. John swung his rifle, the butt smashing its face, and fired point blank. The creature fell, sparks and blood spraying across the sand. Another came and another, but John did not step back. He fought as he had fought long ago, not for command, not for duty, but for survival, for the widows who had placed their faith in him. Hours passed like minutes, the sun rising over a desert burning with war. The ranch was a graveyard of machines, hunters, and fire. The widows bled, their armor shattered, but none retreated. Every scream, every strike was a promise. a vow that they would not die silent. Finally, the Harrow began to fall back, their machines retreating, their drones scattering. The widows raised their voices, a cry not of grief, but of defiance. The ranch still stood, battered, broken, scarred, but alive, and John Harris stood at its heart, his rifle smoking, his chest heaving, the protector of lost stars reborn in fire. He looked to the widows, their faces streaked with blood and ash. "You fought well," he said, his voice low but steady. The leader nodded, her eyes fierce but soft. "And so did you," she replied. But John knew the truth. This was not the end, only a reprieve. The Harrow would come again, stronger, angrier, hungrier. The desert was no longer silent. It was a battlefield. And the last stand was only beginning. The new dawn. The desert was quiet again. But it was not the same quiet John Harris once knew. Smoke rose from the broken barn. The fences were shattered, and the sand was stained with fire and blood. The Harrow had retreated, their drones scattered, their machines dragged back into the dunes, but victory had not come cheap. The widows stood in silence, their armor scorched, their blades heavy with blood. Two of their sisters lay still on the ground, fallen in the fight. The others gathered around them, their voices rising in a low song, a sound of grief that carried through the smoke. John stood apart, his rifle cooling in his hands, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He had buried too many before, and now he had watched others do the same. War never left survivors whole, it only carved deeper scars. Scout limped to his side, pressing close, his fur burned at the edge. John knelt, his hand steady on the dog's back. "You did good, boy," he whispered, his voice rough. The dog whined softly, eyes tired but alive. Even in fire and chaos, some pieces of life endured. The leader of the widows stepped forward, her face streaked with ash and blood, her eyes still glowing blue, carried both grief and fire. "You stood with us," she said, her voice steady. "You fought as one of us." John looked at her, his jaw tight. "I fought because I had no choice," he replied, her gaze sharpened. "There is always a choice, Protector, and you chose to stay." Her words cut deeper than any blade. John wanted to deny it, to claim he had been forced, but the truth burned in his chest. He could have walked away, left them to fight alone, but he had stayed, and in staying he had become what he once swore never to be again: a commander, a protector, a soldier. The widows carried their fallen into the barn ruins, laying them in the center with care. They placed their broken blades across their chests, and their voices rose again. The song was not only grief now, but something older, deeper, a vow. John listened in silence, the sound heavy as the desert night. He did not understand the words, but he understood their meaning. The dead were not gone. They had become part of the fight, part of the fire that would not be extinguished. As the sun broke over the horizon, red light spilling across the dunes, John stood on his porch, the widows gathering beside him. The ranch lay in ruins, but it was not defeated. The wind carried smoke, but also promise. This was no longer a place of silence. It was a fortress, a beacon. The Harrow had tested them and failed, but they would return, stronger, hungrier, and when they did, they would not find prey. The leader placed her hand on the rail of the porch, her eyes fixed on the rising sun. "You are no longer alone, Protector," she said, her voice low but strong. 11 widows came to you, and though we are fewer now, we remain. She looked at him, her gaze unshaken. "We will fight with you, we will die with you, until the last Harrow is ash." John's throat tightened. He had lost friends, lost comrades, lost everything once before. But now, standing with these women who had nothing left but their fury, he felt something he thought he would never feel again: purpose. The desert wind shifted, carrying with it a faint sound, not drones, not machines, but something deeper, something far away. John's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. The war was not finished, it was only beginning, and the universe had chosen his ranch, his silence, to shatter. He turned to the widows, his voice steady. "If you stay here, you stay as soldiers, not as ghosts. We build stronger walls, we dig deeper lines, we make this ranch a graveyard for hunters." The widows bowed their heads, not in sorrow, but in agreement. The Protector had spoken, and his words were law. The sun climbed higher, burning the last shadows from the dunes. John Harris stood at the center of his broken land, no longer just a farmer, no longer just a tired old man. He was once more the protector of lost stars. And the widows stood with him, 11 flames of grief now bound into one fire. The war would come again, darker and fiercer. But they would be ready. The desert was not silent. It breathed, it waited. It carried whispers of battles yet to come. And as John looked to the horizon, rifle in hand, dog at his side, widows at his back, he knew this was not an ending. It was the dawn of something greater, something fiercer, something eternal. The new dawn had come, and with it, the war for the stars had begun.